Now we're moving into a discussion of where am I going? So we're all in these bodies on this planet, but the missing piece is where do we, not just what am I here to accomplish? What am I here to experience? But now we're shifting to look at words after this experience. Where am I going? Is someone not muted? Or is, I don't know what that noise is. Generally acknowledged that hear that? I'm interested in this book on holistic health by my teacher and people who have studied the psyche and physiology, psychophysiology, how our mind affects our body, will say that one of the most destructive impacts on health is the emotion of fear. And so, so my teacher used to say, learn to live fearlessly. And then he said, but not a foolish fearlessness. Like once he saw a bull enraged by a train coming and the bull charged the train. Well, that didn't turn out well for the bull. But it also demonstrates that fearlessness can be absurd when there's no judgment behind it. But we're talking about a fearlessness that is the product of spiritual practice and movement and a product of wisdom and knowledge and clarity of consciousness. So that takes us to what is the major cause of fear in human beings? And I think the consensus is that the major fear that underlies most of our emotions and thinking and many, if not most of our actions, is the fear of death. So, how did it jump to a smaller picture?
It's just because more people are coming.
So anyway, we're having some little technical questions here, but it's okay. So the fear of death. And I think that probably one of the major reasons that people are so stressed and so busy and so frantic in their lives is because they're trying to avoid dealing with, in their own minds and their own consciousness, their death. So we don't do very well with death in this part of the world, in this country. People have a hard time with it. There's a lot of denial about death. And the denial shows up particularly in wanting to keep the aged people and the dying people out of sight. You know, we really don't want to see that. We live in a small community here where we have set as a goal to develop ways of living sustainably and holistically, and to find different ways of being on the planet. So we're a multi-generational community. So one of the things that has happened is we've done quite a lot of work with death and dying and burial, and it's been very interesting and a real life-changing experience for a lot of people, because how you feel about death can really change your life. So we've had the good fortune of being able to keep most of the people that have died here in the last 10 years own the land, not have to be in hospitals. And generally they have been able to pass peacefully here while tended by members of the community, and generally have been buried here on the land. Very simple ceremonies without any paraphernalia. We say they are covered with a blanket of earth. And it's a process that brings us closer to an appreciation of death. Swami Rama used to say, what's the big deal about death? You know, you take this coat off and, you know, get a new coat. You get this body goes, and then you got a new body. And why is that such a big deal? Well, of course, it's a big deal if we don't know that or don't believe that, or have ignored all evidence that that is true. When even before I met Swami Rama, I was curious about this question. And so I did a lot of reading and studying about reincarnation, and discovered that there had been a professor of medicine or psychiatry, University of Virginia, who had spent a good part of his life studying people who claimed to have memories of past lives. And the data that he gathered was pretty amazing. I remember one example of a child in the Middle East, somewhere in the Middle East, who insisted that he wanted to see his family, you know, and his parents said, "But we are your family." He said, "No, I mean my other family." And so they actually allowed him to show them where he wanted to go. And he went to a neighboring village and found this couple who he recognized. And it was you know, et cetera, et cetera. There are so many cases like that. And he investigated all these cases. And in many of the cases, there was just no other way to explain these situations. I mean, you'd have to, you couldn't find a way, really. So with there being so much evidence about this, it's funny that we persist in believing that when we die, that's the end of everything. I mean, that's the general belief, it seems, in this country at this time. I don't know what percentage of people. But it's not that, I mean, I don't personally believe that this is something we dream up to keep us from dealing with the reality that we are annihilated at death. In fact, it's been a part of almost all of the great spiritual traditions, including Christianity. I have read that early Christians were very familiar with and accepting of the concept of coming back to another life and another life. So whatever the philosophy is, or whatever your religious background is, or your spiritual practices, whatever, you really need to find a way to get past the fear of death, because that preoccupies us and causes us to, number one, not really enjoy life as much as we would, if we were at peace about what happens afterwards. But it also, the worry and the stress have an impact, a negative impact on our health. And also, as you remember when we started this series, we called it health and serenity. Well, it not only, the fear of death not only affects health, it certainly affects our serenity. So where am I going after I leave here? That's something that we have to examine. And you can approach this question in your meditation, and we will next week. We will approach that question in meditation. Or you can get more information. Read books about people who have, like the one book I'm thinking of particularly at the moment is a book called The Journey of Souls, written by, you remember his last name?
Newton.
Who knows?
Newton.
Newton. Yeah. Michael Newton.
No.
I think it was Michael Newton.
No.
No.
No. Something else, Newton. But anyway, his last name is Newton. And he was a psychotherapist, and eventually, and actually he was a very agnostic psychotherapist who thought that all of spirituality was nonsense, and he was very hard-nosed, kind of, it really had to do about retraining our reactions and behavioral psychotherapy and so forth. But as he worked with people, he encountered people who were trying to look at their past, the past of their lives, and actually started talking about what happened at the moment of birth, and even what came before that, which he dismissed. But after it happened a number of times, he began to soften and said, well, I don't know how to explain this. I better look into this more. So he started, he was using hypnotherapy, so he started doing hypnotic regressions to the point of birth, and then to see what came before. And many people had memories under hypnosis of events before their birth and then before their conception. And so he became fascinated with this, and he refined his hypnosis, his technique of hypnosis, so that he could take people to what he called a sort of superconscious state, which we would say a deep meditative state, where they could be aware of things that were outside ordinary awareness. And then he would regress them to, not to the previous life, but to what he called the life between lives. And he did this with thousands of patients over, 30, 40 years. And and he recorded all of the sessions. So in his book, he chooses certain cases and lets us hear what people said under hypnosis, under this superconscious hypnosis, about what happened before they were born. And what's really striking and should be deeply impressing to the scientific mind is that people describe very similar experiences, even though they didn't know each other, and they were from different ages and backgrounds and so forth. So this is the kind of information that can be very interesting and helpful if you're dealing with your own questions about death, what happens after death. We also here in our community had a year-long course last year, 2019, on death and dying, led by two Buddhists who have an interesting perspective and have been working with people in hospice for many, many years. I attended that course, and it was quite an immersion in the whole concept of death and how we deal with the prospect of death, and how we can accept death instead of repressing our the idea that we're going to die, and make it something conscious that is present and not something unconscious that's torturing us. And that was a very beautiful and exciting, wonderful educational experience for me personally. So yeah, I mean, usually when people are under 40, they're not much interested in talking about death because, you know, that happens to old people, and, you know, I'm not old. So it doesn't matter. Every now and then there's a young person who's curious, but actually, as you get older, as you approach 40 and get toward 50, and then it begins to dawn on you that, well, maybe I should think about this. Actually, I think being at peace about it would be helpful even when you're young, because concepts are already there that just are being deferred, like, oh, I don't have to worry about that yet. And of course, nobody knows when they're going to die. I mean, some people may know when they're going to die, but people who are deeply spiritual often have pretty much a sense of when that's coming. So this is our inquiry for tonight, is how do I deal with the prospect of death? And what are my thoughts, and what is my, do I experience fear? Is there fear there? And how do I handle that fear? And how is that affecting me? So I'm going to just stop with that little introduction and open the floor to people to ask questions. Yes, can you unmute yourself?
I am unmuted.
Yes, good.
Good. It's very fascinating. I'd like to make just observations. First of all, I am one of the people who had those past life experiences under hypnosis, and I did discover what you would call past lives. That is not a scientific proof that it really existed. Number two, note that the animals have no such thing. So either we're specially designated by the universe, which is another problem, or we are deluding ourselves in a certain way, but I don't have a problem with that. Buddha, by the way, had no fixed view on reincarnation, only nibbana, the idea of being, you know, at oneness, but oneness is not a soul. That's a Hindu concept, the soul transmission, Aurobindo and all those, but not necessarily in Buddhism or in Zen. There is a Zen teacher who wrote a book, Being Nobody, Going Nowhere. So I think that our wanting to believe is exactly right. We have an anxiety about death and dying, which is a brain structure problem, because the animals don't have that. Now, either we're specially designated by the universe, which is really a hard case to make, or we need to believe because it's part of our brain system. And in that case, I'm with you. I'm willing to accept a belief, but I don't have any fear about it anymore because I've got just seeing the larger perspective, and there's no scientific proof behind this. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, great. Thank you for your comments and sharing your experience. I'd love to hear more about your own experience of the regression in past lives and so forth.
I'm happy to share that at any time, yes.
Yeah. What was unique about Newton's work is that he really didn't look at past lives. He looked at the interim between lives, and that's a bit different. And I don't know of others who have really delved into that. Yeah, so that it's for everybody needs to find their own path as far as how they conceive of death and how to be at peace with it. And I think that's the key is, you know, can I come to a point where I don't feel troubled by this
Exactly.
aspect? Yeah, that's the beautiful part. And that can make a huge difference in our own spiritual progress and our own enjoyment of life as a human being on the planet. Who else would like to share? Yes, say your name, unmute and say your name.
Hi, Swami Ravi, this is Renee here.
Oh, okay. I couldn't see you.
Good
I
to
don't-
see you too. So I have a question about the past lives. I know in Bhagavad Gita, I think Krishna talks about like all these lives coming from him, and then when we die, we merge back with him. So I always wondered, like, if I'm moving from one life to the other, I don't expect an answer, but I'm just thinking, like, do we, like, part of ourselves do get mixed with the divine, and then a new creation gets spun off, or how much of our current soul stays going forward, or does it get mixed with the big consciousness, and then, you know, like, you know, the droplets going back into the ocean, and another drop comes out, and which may or may not be the exact same drop that went in.
Right, right. Okay, those are good questions and very appropriate thoughts and probing that you're going through to try to understand this. I think that's great. And certainly people see it in different ways. But I think the teaching that comes from my tradition is that certain parts of us do continue. The teachers, the tantric teachers say, you need to experience the world and you need to have experience in the world from different perspectives. So you come into a different setting with a different body, and that gives you a more rounded experience of the earth, and you learn more, and your evolution can proceed more successfully. So just being in one body is only one angle on being a human being, being in one life with one set of parents in one setting. So we get this multiplicity of experiences so that we evolve as souls or as and so the whole question of a soul comes up, and what does that mean? And it means different things to different people apparently. But when we talk about these issues, we really need, I think, to untangle it. In order to untangle it, we need to have a perspective of more than one structure of consciousness, more than one level of awareness. So we know that we have these different realms of consciousness because we go through that in meditation. If we meditate continuously and we go into deeper spaces where it's different, you know, it's definitely a different reality in there. So from some levels, there are things you can't understand. And from another level, that might be very clear. So in the Upanishads, they talk about the different realms of consciousness. as the waking state, the dreamlike state, and then the dreamless sleep. And then there's another state that they call the fourth state, which is the overlaying of those other three. And we find that sort of confirmed in the work of some European philosophers, especially Jean Gebser, Jean Gebser, who wrote a book called The Ever-Present Origin. Well, that's the English translation. And he was a master of the philosophy of consciousness. He died in the 1960s or early 70s, I'm not sure. So he called these, he used different terminology from the Indian terminology, but the concepts are roughly parallel. And so that dreamlike state is what he called the mythical structure of consciousness, where the stories and the narratives are what shapes how we think of the world. And certainly that was a structure of consciousness that was more dominant in the West and Europe in the 1300s, 1400s, back in the Middle Ages and earlier. So that that narrative of that dependence on the story, or the use of narrative to discover reality, is the nature of one of those levels of consciousness that we access within ourselves. And if we access that level, then the story threads through not just this life, but other lives as well. And so that's kind of the access, the entryway to coming into connection with that phenomenon. And so then to answer your questions more, there would seem to be in this philosophy some continuation, especially of our samskaras, the term that's used for the memory traces, that when we die, those don't fall away, those go with us. And we get another chance to work with that remains. And that's an ongoing process. And the reports of the people that Newton worked with tend to also confirm that. So yes, so I didn't catch your name, the gentleman who spoke first.
Joseph.
Yes, your name. Anyway, you were saying it would be extraordinary if we were different from other animals, and I think you're right. It is extraordinary, and that we are extraordinary, and human life is extraordinary, and that we do have some. My teacher used to say that animals are governed by instinct, but humans are governed by a consciousness that is of a different level.
Yeah, but who produced that?
Pardon me?
Who produced this state that made us different from all the rest of the creatures on planet Earth?
Well, there are many explanations for that. And different cultures and traditions have different explanations for that.
Yeah.
But I think that, I operate on the premise that that there is a different consciousness within me than there is in animals. And maybe that's not all animals. I don't know. I don't remember if I ever experienced the world as an animal. I don't remember that. So I can't say too much about it. But anyway, I do think that humans are extraordinary. And I do think that there's something that goes on beyond death. And so that's my personal philosophy, and that's what allows me to function. And it certainly allows me to not feel a fear of death. I mean, I say that maybe there's a level of fear of death that I haven't accessed yet, but for the most part, I feel pretty comfortable with it. And you know, like I'm in my 80th year, so I guess I should be comfortable if, and I feel pretty comfortable about it. And in fact, I feel increasingly curious about it, and you know, kind of want to, you know, it's like if you're reading a novel, you're tempted to skip ahead to the last chapter. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to just go chapter by chapter, and so I'm trying to stick with that. So I don't want to get too much into thinking about death and what happens afterwards, because I'm still doing this. But I feel very intrigued about it, and kind of excited. So how are you each dealing with this question? And what are you thinking about death? And if you haven't really consciously thought about death, maybe you would like to start that process and find out more and think about it and integrate that into your way of being, so that there's not this lingering thing in the background that you don't want to deal with, that keeps you running around frantically trying to not sit still and deal with it. And I think that describes a lot of our Western fear of death. Is it keeps us running around and trying to not be quiet and introspective, because we might bump into it. So anyone else with what other comments or questions or sharing that you have around the subject of death? I'm sure a lot of people have thought about it, not just us older guys. Yes. Did you say something, Shane? Oh, no, that was somebody else. Yes. Speak up. Oh, is that George?
No.
Steve, can you hear me?
Steve,
Yes.
please. Yes.
Hi, how are you doing? I've thought about this. I'm personally meditating for a good while, and I ran into the concept of the continuity of life and reincarnation when I was quite young, in my early teens. And over time, I've realized that it seems like the fear of death, not to mention the fear of life in general, can have a lot to do with how connected one feels to the whole, just the whole. That feeling disconnected and feeling like a separation can be scary. And the more I felt just kind of, I call it kind of a warm and fuzzy connection with the whole, that the less that fear is there, there's kind of a sense of everything's okay, whatever's happening. My individual intelligence that's able to fit inside this body may not be able to understand all the mechanics and machinations of what's going on, but there's a sense of I guess, being supported by kind of a warmth of feeling about, oh, it's okay, everything's okay, even if my body goes, that I don't
Right.
go, and everything's okay.
Right, right. That's wonderful. That's beautiful. And that's what is so important for us to reach that plateau, if you will, or that platform to stand on of kind of trust and feeling that, okay, there's something really much larger here, and it's it's I don't have to understand all the details,
Mhm.
but as it goes along, it's going to be okay. And I think that that could also, if there weren't the process behind it that you have been through, then it might be just a way of denial. But as we work through it and deal with our feelings and find that space, then it's no longer denial. It's like wisdom, you know. I mean, and that connection to the whole is actually what spirituality is all about. And we touch into it, and then we forget it, and then we touch into it. And the more we can feel it on a deeper level, kind of in a consistent way, the happier and more joyful we are, and the better able we are to enjoy being here now in this body at this point. It's sort of like, if I spend all my time worrying about what happens next, then how do I get involved with the joy of what's happening now? You know, so we don't need to be preoccupied with it, but we need to have a philosophy about it, or a sense of it, or a grasp of it that lets us be serene and content. And then our health will be stronger, and our joy of living will be greater.
Yeah, it just brought up to me that I guess I've seen it two ways. When I was younger and read about it, I got an intellectual understanding of it over time, particularly with meditating longer, you know, a longer number of years. I guess I had more of a feeling sense of it, just kind of a constant feeling sense of that. So having an intellectual understanding of it, I don't think the fear really went so much then. It helped a lot, but it was over time when I just felt that certainty that it not only impacted what might be around death, but certainly all around life each day, and just really enjoying life each day.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, and just the intellectual understanding is not enough, but it helps.
Yes.
Sort of gives you permission to move into the feeling part, you know. And so we can't ignore that. So that's why I say the reading is helpful, and the learning and talking and discussing and seeing what other people have worked out about their approach to death.
It still helps. I still really enjoy learning from the intellectual level, however much there's that, you know, internal sense. I still really enjoy. I mean, my curiosity and desire to know just increase with the years. So
Yeah.
even with the increasing inner experience, it still increases.
Yeah, and that's part of the fun of being alive, and is discovering more and more about the world and how it works and who we are, and you know, that's the joy of the process, of being human.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yes, and in the tantric tradition, we say curiosity is your best ally. You know, being curious, and well, what is that about, and how does that work? And that helps us find our way into new ways of seeing the world, and new dimensions of life, and new dimensions of consciousness. Yeah, and meditation is where a lot of that exploration starts and is grounded. It can happen in other aspects of our lives, but when it's happening in the meditation daily, that's a huge support for it to happen all the time.
Right. Yeah, that's the way it seems.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you,
Steve. Who else? Yes. Speak up.
Well, I'm fully with you the way you described it. It's having that perspective. But and see part of and that I'm really, that's a beautiful way. I mean, the whole point is to be feeling unconflicted or non-ambivalence. Ambivalence is the problem among human beings. Now, the perspective I'm bringing about here is this: is to keep our big view. The animals, some animals have been around for 40, 50 million years. We're a newcomer. We're newbies on the planet. We've made a big deal about ourselves, but we're very short-lived. We don't really know if we're really viable on planet Earth. We may just be an experimental species. There's we don't have a real history behind us compared to the rest of the creatures. So this is just perspective. Those animals don't seem to be in fear states. They just live and they die accordingly to the forces that work. But I think we've projected fear all over the place because of the nature of our very unstable form of short-lived species brain development. Anyway, that makes me feel better.
Well, we have a lot to learn from all the other creatures, and
Yeah.
the nature of the nature of nature, the nature of Gaia. It's a lot.
Yes.
Because that's so much a part of who we are. I mean, we're not, we're on the planet, but we're also of the planet, and our physical being, our physical bodies are only arbitrarily distinguishable from the rest of nature, because our tissues are inhabited by microbes, and we're in a soup of life forms, microscopic life forms that are shaping us and doing our metabolic work and changing our DNA. And when we separate ourselves from nature and we're in a like indoors in an urban setting and not connected to nature, we suffer from that. And that not only affects our physical well-being, but it also affects our consciousness adversely. So yeah, we are ill-advised to separate ourselves from the rest of nature, because our existence on the planet in this lifetime depends on our seamless connection, our seamless continuity with other life forms, plants and animals, and air, the atmosphere, and the microbes, and the viruses, which are so much a part of our functioning. As I quoted once before on one of these sessions, that a great virologist, I'm trying to remember her name, she said, we are our viruses, because our viruses are just the DNA and RNA that are used to make the chromosomes, and they're constantly being reshaped and changed to make us adaptable to what's happening on the planet. And a lot is happening on the planet right now, and we have to be a lot more resilient. So we need a lot of viruses, and they're flooding in by the trillions, and they're coming in from the atmosphere and from everywhere. And we choose and pick and plug them into our DNA and shape it and reshape it so that we have that resilience. And so we are immersed in viruses, and we are then therefore made up of viruses. And so we shouldn't get too paranoid about that virus is trying to kill me. That's a pretty distorted perspective. And the science, for what I'm saying, the science is there. It's not something I made up. It's an emerging awareness in the scientific world that we are actually as much or more the microbes than we are who we think we are in our physical being. they are us. And that's a shift that is really overdue for us to understand that. The understanding of that is a shift that's really overdue. And I think we would all be a little saner right now if we could grasp that. Yes. Anybody else? Joseph, do you have something else to say? No. Anybody else? Well, we're getting near the end of our hour. Yes,
George.
George, great.
Yeah, I was really curious, but it is Dr. Michael Newton, and he set up something called the Newton Institute to study the between life memories. So thank you for that little pointer. Looks like a fascinating topic.
Yeah, it really is. And if we can approach death with curiosity, then we're in the spirit of the tradition of Tantra. If we approach it with fear, it's like, oops, wrong path. You know, I got to go around another door.
It also seems to me to tie into the question of whether or not consciousness is sort of something that's within us or a field that we partake in, are connected to.
Say that again.
The consciousness, I'm sure there are more theories, but one theory is just local to our brain. It's something that's, you know, in our brains. It doesn't, and is individual to each of us.
Right.
But the other perspective is that there's actually a field of consciousness which our brains tap into. Then there's some arguments both ways. It's one of those questions where I don't think science is really going to give us any answers anytime soon. So,
well, the latter view that is more a part of this spiritual tradition that I'm here to share with you. Swami Rama used to say, all of the body is in the mind, but not all of the mind is in the body. In other words, there is consciousness that we can tap into that's not just within us. And I think there's a lot of support for that, and it'll be interesting to see how the science develops around that. Well, great. What a wonderful group, wonderful discussion. Thank you all for showing up tonight, and we'll be back next week. But I'm going to let Gerald clue you in as to other things that might be happening.
Great, thank you. Yes, next week we'll be doing a meditation approaching this same topic. And this is the end of our 3-part series. Next week will be the end. And what's next? If you have a suggestion or a curiosity or something you would like for us to approach or talk about, either as a one-time situation or a multiple 3-part, 2-part series, we're open to your comments and your suggestions. So send them along in an email if you could to dancingshivatantra@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, and even if you have comments about tonight or questions about tonight or any of the 3-part series that we've done, we welcome the questions, the curiosities. And we'll try to get back to you with an answer, or we'll answer it on the Zoom.
Yeah.
So yeah, we appreciate your participation and support. We appreciate the donations that come in from this, and we love to see you every Sunday. So why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself, and then we'll say good night and thank you to everybody.
Good night.
Good
Thank you.
night.
All right.
Thank you.
Excellent. Wonderful.
Good night.
Jody, did you get my address?
I did. Thank you.
Hi, Ellen.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Take care. Hey,
Hi,
Shane.
Stephen.
Hey,
See you
Jody.
all.
Bye.